Right as anticipation builds for the summit, we turn to expert voices to help us understand what lies ahead. We're joined by Mr. Mark Toth, a national security and foreign policy expert based in California. Mr. Toth, good evening to you, or good morning. Let me start by asking you, how significant is it that this is the first US-Russia summit on American soil since 1988?
Good morning, Mona, and thank you for having me back on Qnews, and greetings to the viewers. I think it's very significant, especially under the circumstances that we're having it. Putin, and in terms of the international court, is a wanted war criminal. And the fact that he's getting this meeting on U.S. soil so far after the last one that occurred between two leaders from the U.S. and Russia is significant. These aren't ideal circumstances. Trump thinks it's worth it to try to bring peace to Eastern Europe and is making that effort, but the circumstances are extraordinary.
Right, Mr. Toth, Trump speaks of a 25% chance of failure and hope for peace, yet also warns of severe sanctions. Now, how might economic leverage shape such talks?
Yeah, I think when it comes to Trump, for those of us that analyze him both in Washington, D.C. and elsewhere, you really have to pay attention to his actions, not so much his words. Viewers might recollect that he said he was going to solve this war on day one. Obviously, that was hyperbole, and that didn't happen. We're, here in August, 7 months after he took office. I really think from an analytical standpoint, when I look at it, from a military viewpoint, I think you really have to look at the weak hand that Putin is bringing to the table in Alaska. This is a man who effectively has been fighting Ukraine for 11 years, only controls 18% of the territory. His economy is in tatters. Just this week, he was hit with the embarrassing reality that the GDP per capita of Kazakhstan, a former Russian satellite, is actually now greater than the average Russian's income. So that's embarrassing. He's highly dependent upon China, highly dependent upon North Korea for ammunition and troops at this point. He doesn't have the strongest of negotiating positions. So I think from his standpoint, he's going to, from an optical standpoint, if you will, he's going to try to present a position of strength. And I think today, and again, time will tell, maybe a little bit more about kabuki theater as both sides posture themselves as to which way they want to take it. But we'll see, right? This happens later today at around 3 p.m. Alaska time. So
now, you were speaking about President Putin, right? But there is also a very important ally there watching closely, which is China. We'll come back to that. But why do you think the summit is being held at the Allmendorf-Richardson military base in Alaska? And does the location carry symbolic weight for Russia or for the U.S.?
Yeah, Mona, that's a great question because there is a lot of symbolism going on right now. Allmendorf, that massive U.S. air base in Alaska, a key part of NORAD, which defends Northern America, if you will, in joint partnership with Canada, was a significant base during the Cold War and remains one. So you've got that Cold War imagery coming up. Just today, Sergey Lavrov, the foreign minister of Russia, showed up prior to the meetings wearing a CCCP T-shirt, which is the Russian wording for the former USSR. So basically, he's signaling messages back to a Russian domestic audience that, look, maybe this Cold War isn't quite lost as everyone claimed it to be, and kind of thumbing his noses. So the significance is there. And then I think viewers may not be aware of this, but there's also been, for the last 15, 20 years in Russia, a revisionist view of Alaska, trying to claim that it was not a permanent land purchased by the U.S., but that Washington had forged documents that originally it was lease and that it's actually still Russian territory. And so you've got that symbology going on. Lots of different things here, but lots of messaging, lots of games being played. But that's a good point for you to bring because it is highly symbolic.
Well, let me here welcome with us also Mr. Sergey Markov, former advisor to the Russian President Vladimir Putin from Moscow. Mr. Markov, we thank you so much for joining us here. And Mr. Toth here spoke about the position of President Putin, and he said that he was not in such a position of strength. Now, this summit will not produce formal agreements and not only discussions. What does this say about the current state of negotiations, and what's your comment on what Mr. Toth said?
First of all, I want to say there are three levels. One level is peace deal. Peace deal easy to reach because for the peace deal, what we need is to change Ukrainian regime from neo-Nazi, Russophobic, terroristic form to the normal democratic style. This is Zelensky disagree and Europe also disagree. This is impossible. Another unconditional ceasefire. This already Russia against, because unconditional ceasefire meaning that European countries want to send 50,000 troops to the Ukrainian territory as occupation corps, also to put anti-rocket missile system in Poland and Romania. Then, after some provocation of Zelensky very provocative, as you know, it will be a war between Russia and Europe. This is also a very bad development. That's why Russia against this. Another possibility, third level, is conditional ceasefire, meaning that ceasefire, but only if Europe agree not to send European troops, not to send armament to Ukrainian army, and Zelensky agreed to stop violence, mobilization of the Ukrainian male to the army. So this is three possible. Realistically, what will be? I think Putin and Trump will agree about air truce. It means the air strikes against big cities, which is far from the front line. Mm-hmm. Also, they will be agree about a sectoral ceasefire, for example, in Kherson region, and then they will agree about starting of discussion about conditions of the general ceasefire, including exchange of the territories. And this will be decided on the meeting with participation of Putin, Zelensky, and Trump, I think something in 1 week or 10 days from now. Then it will be discussion. But I think that Europe will block possibility to have real ceasefire with Russia. So it's my expectation.
Now, these are the Russian viewpoint of the primary goals it wants to reach or it hopes to achieve at this summit. But the question is, what leverage does Russia has to put or to achieve what priorities in this meeting? What leverage does Russia have?
It's very simple. First, Russian leverage is that Russian army is going forward. And the speed of going forward is becoming bigger and bigger. And Russian army, in fact, winning. And if this war continues, Russian army will increase this pressure. Russian army fighting not for territories. Russian army taking territories, but territories is not important. Taking territories just part of the pressure of Russia for the Western countries to agree to change the regime from terroristic, neo-Nazi, and Russophobic form. Another leverage is that Trump is interesting to stop anti-Russian sanctions, because Trump many times told that anti-Russian sanctions of Biden moved the Russian economy to the hands of the Chinese economy. And Chinese economy is main global strategic challenge to the United States leadership in the world. That's why Trump interesting to make a relation with Russia better. So it's two leverages.
Now, Mr. Toth, let me get back to you. And these were the Russian point of view or the primary goals for Russia from Mr. Markov's point of view. From your point of view, what are the American viewpoint and what are the primary goals each side hopes to achieve at the summit, particularly the U.S.?
Yeah, look, I think if you take President Trump at his word, he's trying to achieve a peace here to stop the killing. I would respectfully disagree with Mr. Markov about the Russian leverage. Look, from a European standpoint, they're not going to capitulate. If anything, I think Moscow's got to read the room better. You have Europe adopting massive more defense spending. They're committing 5% GDP to spending for the weaponry and ammunition going forward based on Trump's coddling of them to do that, or prodding of them to do that. And so that's a growing threat. And NATO air power at this point is massive in terms of the threat that it can present to Russian forces if some kind of conflict were to break out. And I would note, in terms of, again, lack of leverage, Russian air power has pretty much been, aside from drones and ballistic missiles, non-existent on the battlefields in Ukraine. So Russia's not in as strong a position as Mr. Markov would suggest. And so I think from that standpoint, at this point, Trump's goal here is to try to get Zelensky and Putin to sit down in a trilateral summit and focus on peace concepts that both sides can live with. I think if we keep posturing here and we keep talking about Ukrainian strengths, Russian strengths, et cetera, it's all good. That's all kabuki theater, but it's not really what's happening on the ground. I think Russia's under a lot of pressure here, and even in a post-war environment, they're going to be. Because let's just say this results in a ceasefire. It won't today. This is just a feeling out meeting. But let's just say it even ends up in a ceasefire or a permanent peace. Russia's going to have to compete in an economy where you've got these Trump tariffs in place, and it means a weakened world economy. Now, he'll be helped certainly by his BRICS partners, and that might get some level of control back. But the Russian economy has been heavily weighted by this war, and it's going to be difficult in a tariff environment for them to quickly regain their footing. There's not going to be much commerce, globally speaking. There's not going to be as much trade, and there's going to decrease demand for Russian oil and gas. So, Russia's facing a lot here. So just to put a bow on it, I think what we really need to be doing here is saying, what can we do to stop the killing? What can we do to make sure that Russia doesn't gain territory by illegal actions? They are a permanent member of the United Nations Security Council. They were supposed to prevent something like this invasion that occurred. And then the last point that I'd make, we've got to get rid of the nonsense about the Nazis. I mean, that's from an American standpoint of view, when we hear that in Europe, it's laughable. It's just not acceptable.
Mr. Markov, what do you have on that and the opinion of Mr. Toth, and especially with President Putin reportedly suggesting nuclear arms control could be discussed alongside Ukraine peace terms?
Of course, nuclear arms control also should be on the table, because Russia and America and nuclear superpowers, they have special responsibility in the face of the billions of human beings. Also, improving bilateral relations. Now it's a crazy situation when embassy cannot give even visas to the people, and you should take into account that the number of families who is joined with America, especially Jewish family, and there are possibly hundreds of thousands, possibly millions of them, and they need to travel to each other. Now it's blocked. Also, the fact that Russia cannot use dollar in all this world trade undermine position of dollar in the global economy, and for Donald Trump it's very, very important. So this also could be one of the directions, bilateral relations. But nevertheless, Trump very much wants to get a Nobel Peace Prize. It's a reality. He already had negotiation with Norway government, with head of the NATO and other people about Nobel Prize. He really wants this for the different purposes, not just for glory, but because he succeeded.
But here, Mr. Markov, let me again reiterate what Mr. Toth spoke about, and that President Putin is not in position to bargain, and he is not in the strength that he possible arguments or leverage in those talks. What do you think of that?
It's strange. I already mentioned Russian army is weak. Russian economy is stable situation. Look, economic growth in Russia last year 3.5. Economic growth in the United States 2%. In Europe 1%. So Russian position in economy quite well, look at the supermarkets in Russia. They look better possibly than in Europe and United States. Political situation and society is stable. So Russia, in fact, can continue this war. Russia doesn't want to continue this war because for us, it's some kind of civil war. For us, Ukrainians and Russians, it's not like French and German. It's like Syrians and Arabs, Egyptians and Arabs. That's why we want to stop this war. But nevertheless, if our demands very clear, very much clear, ceasefire should be step to the peace, but not to the new bloody stage of the war. And stopping of war should mean that political repression in Ukraine against language, Orthodox Church and people should be stopped. Very simple. If the Western countries disagree, the war will continue, and Russia will win this war.
Now, Mr. Toth, I guess there is a question that should be that should go both ways here, which is what do you think will happen if those talks succeeded to have a kind of end result? What would be the next stage of diplomacy? What would be the next stage for negotiations?
Yeah, if they're successful, let's just say the goal today, let's take Trump at his word, that he tweeted basically is that this is to get Putin to the negotiating table so the discussions can happen with Zelensky. I think that next stage is going to be, look, how do you create a demarcation line? I don't see a comprehensive peace deal. Europe is not ready for that. Friedrich Merz in his meeting just recently, he's the German chancellor, recently installed. He's not going to accept any kind of territorial concessions on a permanent basis. He and Zelensky decided that. They're still arguing that Ukraine will have the right to return, to apply and become part of NATO at some point. So there's a lot of gray areas there that still are going to have to be determined between the two sides. But I think getting them to the table is probably the next logical step and seeing if there's any potential for a deal. Now, if Russia, as Mr. Markov said, doesn't want to continue this war, there's this very simple solution to that. They can withdraw across their lines. It's Russian forces that invaded Ukraine, not the other way around. He's saying it's not about territory, so why be inside of territorial Ukraine? He's saying it's not about territory, so why to have those referendums that they did to basically seize Kherson and Zaporizhia, Donetsk and Luhansk, etc. In mind, it's very much about territory, what Putin has been trying to do. And I think you only have to listen to Putin's words. Look, he said it to Tucker Carlson. He said it elsewhere, that he wants to create this new, Kiev and Rus to go back in terms of mythical Russian history. So his version of Peter the Great, I guess. But again, hopefully, if there's a next step here, it's getting them to the table. I'm not optimistic. Europe's not ready for this. I don't believe Putin is ready for this.
But here, Mr. Toth, excuse me for cutting your words here, but Trump's explicit refusal to discuss Ukrainian territorial concessions. What does this tell about U.S. positioning?
Right, yeah. And again, I think we have to be careful about the words that Trump uses at this point because he's kind of channeled that both ways. And that may just be his typical approach to create a little bit of chaos so neither side knows what his position really is, because in some instances he's called for swapping of territory. He's gotten upset with Zelensky recently for Zelensky rightly saying under his constitution he can't individually or unilaterally, if you will, cede territory to Russia in any peace process. It would have to be voted upon and approved by the Rada. But then on the flip side, he's also stated that they're not. And that's certainly what the position has been of the UK, of France, of Germany, that there won't be any, and certainly Poland, the Baltic states, etc. Those the closest to the Russian borders all agree with that. So time will tell.
Now, how might the perception of deals over deterrence affect U.S. alliances in Asia, especially China?
Right. There's two school of thoughts in Washington. You've got one school of thought that believes the U.S. can form some kind of natural alliance with Russia, especially via Putin, and in effect peel him off from Beijing. I personally think that's naive. There's a man by the name of Elbridge Colby that's an under defense secretary in the Pentagon who's somewhat articulating that. Look, I highly disagree with what Putin has been doing. I disagree with him as a man, but I don't think he's foolish enough to realize that a subsequent Democratic president or a different kind of Republican president might say, no, look, we're not going to be a natural ally of Russia. And so I think Russia's relationship with China is there to stay. I think that's a partnership that's come to benefit both mutually from their standpoint. So from that standpoint, I just don't see that happening. I think it's going to be more of Europe having to look out for itself. I think you're going to return more to a Cold War type environment that we lived through in the 1950s through the 1980s. And we're just going to have to see out whether totalitarian regimes win out or whether democracies do.
Now, Mr. Toth, let me ask you, from your analysis, what does success look like for this summit? What signs should we watch for that indicate progress or failure? And what if those signs do not get along with the Russian demands?
Right. Yeah, I think it's a great question because I think you're going to have to look out for it in two different kinds of ways. Both sides will try to win the day, right? You're going to hear the Russians say, this was great or this was bad, right? Either reaction to it. You'll hear the Americans doing the exact same thing, and then you're going to hear what the Ukrainians are saying. I wouldn't be as focused as much, I would suggest to viewers, on the words that get spoken today by either side. I'd look for the subsequent actions that start to happen. Does this lead to a summit between Putin and Zelensky and Trump? Look, I hope that it does. I think at this point, all three need to be in the same room because that's the only chance you're going to have to see whether or not a peace deal can be cut. You can't do it where Trump is negotiating on behalf of Ukraine and by extension negotiating on behalf of the rest of Europe and dividing that table up, if you will, with Putin. You've got to have all the players at the table to see whether peace is possible. So I would look for the reactions. I'd look for the Russian reactions. And at this point, at every stage where Trump has claimed to have had good progress with Putin in conversations, you almost immediately have the bombing of Ukrainian cities, et cetera, with massive drone and ballistic missile attacks. That tells me more about what the Russian position is, which says, hey, look, we're not stopping. This war is continuing. We want Ukraine, in effect, to capitulate. We're not going to accept anything less than complete control, one way or the other, over Ukraine's future. And, as Mr. Markov said, if they view it as a civil war, I don't see why they would stop until they get what they want. Now, whether they can get it or not is a different question. And I'm confident, just as a military analyst here, there's no way that Russia can win this war with conventional weapons, not with the decimated army that they have, not with the decimated command and control that's been caused by massive losses over the last 3.5 years, not when you're relying on North Korean troops to supplement your fighting forces. Those are all signs with a big flashing light, red light, that your military is foundering and not doing very well. I mean, basically, just one last comment there. The Russian military advances are basically what a soldier can walk in a foot's pace. That's not impressive. That's not a military juggernaut.
But that is so far from your point of view, sir, because facts on the ground that Russia is in control of several areas in Ukraine and they are in control of territories. So the issue is that Russia is not in a strength position is not truly what is existing on the ground. And here we have to reiterate the Secretary of State, Mark Rubio, that described the meeting as a feel-out session with follow-up talks involving maybe Ukraine's President Zelensky and European leaders. So what do you have on that? What do you think any follow-up trilateral talks with Zelensky and European leaders would look like if the Russian president here refused such talks?
Yeah, just to quickly, address the point that you're making about the facts on the ground. Yes, but as I pointed out earlier in this thing, it's after 11 years of war that Russia still just controls 18% of the country. And if you look at the recent gains, you're talking a square kilometer gain. You're not talking massive sweeping gains like what you've seen in World War II or what you've seen in the Middle East, where hundreds of kilometers are being gained in a day. And then you have to look at the actual cost to the Russian military. 1 million casualties to gain that much territory over the course of 11 years. That's not strength on the ground. That's an army that has run into an obstacle and needs to find a way out. Just to try to make that clear, I'm not saying that Russia doesn't have options. Russia is very good at throwing mass at something. And I apologize. The rest of your question was?
Right, Mr. Toth. Unfortunately, my time is out here, but we thank you so much, Mr. Mark Toth, a national security and foreign policy expert, and definitely the thanks goes also to Mr. Sergey Markov, former advisor to Russian President Vladimir Putin. We thank you for sharing your insights and expertise with us today.